Hello everyone, I'm K.Scott. I'm the writing tutor for the College of Business going forward. I'm also enrolled in Dr. McDaniel's organizational behavior class this summer term. She asked me to put together a PowerPoint and a video to talk you guys through the correct formatting of APA citations and reference styles. So make sure you have the PowerPoint pulled up and let's get started. Okay, so the first thing you need to know about citations and references is that they are 100% important and non-negotiable. You have to have them in your papers. If you don't, your paper is going to be considered plagiarized. Now, plagiarism by definition is the taking of one's ideas or thoughts and passing them off as your own. You can do this by not having correct in-text citations, by not having correct citations on your reference page, or by not putting the citation at all. So make sure that you always cite your source, and if you don't know whether or not you should cite your source, just do it to be safe. Please be mindful of the fatal flaw policy also. The maximum number of errors is 1 per 125 words. I've listed both the plagiarism policy and the fatal flaw policy for this class that was published on Dr. McDaniel's syllabus below, so make sure you read over those to clarify why you should care about these citations and references. The next slide talks about the 3 pieces of required information that must appear in all of your in-text citations. The first requirement is the author's last name. Please be mindful that we are not on a first name basis with these authors. You cannot refer to them by their first name. If you must refer to the author by their first name, you can do it the very first time you reference them within your paragraph. So you would introduce them by their first and last name, and every other instance in which you refer to them, you need to use just their last name. The second requirement is the date of publication. This is the date in which an article or a book was published or copyrighted. That information should be found on the copyright page. I'll show you how to format this information a little bit later in the presentation. But the one thing you need to know is the date of publication must be present. I do have a clause that says you can omit the publication date if it's the second time or the third time that you reference the source within the same paragraph. But be mindful, this is only a special case. In this special case, you can reference the publication date the first in-text citation and omit it the rest of the times as long as it's the only source within the paragraph. So if I only reference one article, I can put the publication date first and just the author's name and the page number after. But if I reference 2 articles within that paragraph, I need the author's last name and the date of publication every single time you reference it. The last requirement of in-text citations are page numbers. Anytime you use a direct quotation with quotation marks, you have to include a page number. It's important that you include this page number so that when your professors are checking your work, they can go back to the actual source you're referencing and look at the page to ensure that that quote, in fact, appears on that page. The next slide talks about some general rules of thumb for APA writing style. Now, number 1 is sort of just talking about on your reference pages. You should always make sure you include the author's last name, followed by a comma, with their first initial, and then a period. You should always address authors this way on your reference sheet. You should not use the author's first name on your reference page. Number 2 talks about how to reference long works within your writing. So this is not on the reference page. This is within your essay. Anytime you reference a long work, like a book or a play or a documentary or something to that effect, you should always put the title in italics. That is how you denote that it is a long work. Now for shorter works, all you need are quotation marks. Shorter works would be titles of short articles or episodes within a television series or song titles. You only need quotation marks for those. Please be mindful that you still need that page number. So wherever you find the information, make sure you note down the page number so that you can reference it in your in-text citations, but also on your reference page. Slide 5 introduces you to some in-text citation rules and examples. I've given you the rules and provided you with some examples of how those rules should look once you apply them to your writing. The first example is how to cite at the end of a sentence. If you take a look at example 1 with me, we have in bold the author's last name and the publication date. This is what we like to call the speaker tag. Anytime we need to tag the author at the beginning of our sentence, we should put the author's last name and the publication date following within parentheses. If you are going to use a direct quotation right after your parenthetical publication date, you should put a comma, then open your quotation marks. If you are going to put your own words after the publication date, you don't need the comma. Always make sure you put the page number at the very end of your sentence after the quoted material. You should put the period outside of the parenthetical citation. Try to think of your parenthetical citation as part of the sentence. That'll probably help discipline you to put the period at the end of the parenthetical citation instead of the end of your quote. The page number should be written by opening parentheses, putting a P, period, then the page number on which the quote appears. Then close your parentheses, put your period, and you're done. If you don't want to reference the speaker within your sentence, that's okay. You can just put the author's last name, the publication date, and the page number within parentheses and separated by commas at the very end of your sentence. Make sure you put the period on the outside though. It does not go within the quotation marks. The second rule is citing in the middle of sentences. If you would like to reference the speaker, you can put the author's name and the publication date following. But if you would just like to use a pronoun, you can do that too. So in example 3, we say, she stated, students often had difficulty using APA style. Close quotation marks, open parentheses. I have my author's last name, the publication date, and the page number. Then I close parentheses. I'm going to put a comma after this parenthetical citation to denote that that citation is done. Then I'm going to continue the rest of my sentence. The third rule is to introduce quotes using a signal phrase, which is that speaker tag that we talked about earlier. So according to Jones, 1998, if you want to reference the author within the sentence, you don't have to include their last name in the parenthetical citation at the end. If you do not use the author's name in the signal phrase, you do need to include it within the parenthetical citation. Make sure you separate each piece of information with a comma. It shouldn't be a semicolon, not a space, not a period, a comma. In the next slide, I give you a color-coded analysis of what it looks like for you to write an APA style in your essay and on your reference page. So make sure that you look over this image. It'll give you a pretty good idea of how this all should look when it's inserted into your passages. We spoke earlier about how to use authors' names in your in-text citations, but I want to revisit that because there is something that I wanted to talk about. So in an in-text citation, once again, you should always follow the publication date from your author's last name. You do not need to use the page number at the end of your sentence in your parenthetical citation if you have paraphrased the information from the source. So if you have a direct quotation, you should always put the page number at the end. If you paraphrase the information, or if you're drawing a conclusion from information, you do not need to put the page number. But you do need to include the author's last name and the publication date still. That part's non-negotiable. The second point I wanted to make is if you're referencing more than one source in one citation, so let's say that I want to have 3 pieces of quoted information from 3 different sources within the same sentence. So I will inevitably need to put all 3 sources inside of one parenthetical citation. The way that you do this is you put each author's last name followed by the publication date. You'll separate the name and the date with a comma, and then you will separate the sources by semicolons. So if you take a look at 2B, it gives you an example. So I open the parentheses, put Geno, comma, 2015, publication date. So that is one source. Then I put a semicolon, Grant, 2013. That is a second source, semicolon, Carter and Silva, comma, 2010. Close parentheses, period outside of the parenthetical citation. So in the next slide, I wanted to clarify something that doesn't happen very often, but I wanted you to have the information just in case you ran into a scenario like this. These are citation rules on quoting directly from a source. Quotes that are 40 words or less should be included within your sentence, just like we typically cite sources and quote information. But if you have more than 40 words, you do need to set off that quotation in a specific format from your essay. So please take a look at number 2 with me. If you take a look at the first sentence in red, it says, Groisberg and Conley's 2013 article expresses the following. Since my quote, or my information that I want to quote, is longer than 40 words, I need to set this off from my entire essay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter, and I'm going to tab this entire paragraph over once. So it should be indented. I will then type my direct quotation exactly as it appears without quotation marks. You do not use quotation marks when you have an indented quotation. So I'm not going to use quotation marks. Then I'm going to put the quote exactly as it appears in the text, along with the page number at the end in the parenthetical citation. Remember, you still put the period at the end of the parenthetical citation here. You don't put it directly at the end of the sentence. Okay, so the information on this next slide, on slide 10, is what we're on right now if you got lost. On the next slide, we're going to start talking about reference pages. So everything that we talk about from here on out, or to the end of the video, should be applicable on your reference page. Your reference page is located at the very end of your essay. To set this up, you just need your blank page. Go to the very center of the page and type references. Very plain, 12-point font, basic. Don't make it bold. Don't italicize it. Don't make it pretty colors. Don't underline it. Just references, very plain Jane. Okay? When you start doing your citations, the first rule is that they all must have a hanging indent. If you don't know what a hanging indent is, that means that the first line of your citation is aligned with the left margin of your paper. Every other line that is included in that citation should be indented once. Most word processing programs have a format that you can apply for hanging indents, so it will do it for you. If it won't, all you have to do is tab the lines over yourself, but it does have to have a hanging indent. When you write authors' names in your reference page citations, you should always write them in the format of author's last name, comma, first initial, period. Every single time you will need to write it like this. If there is more than one author, you put the last name, comma, first initial, period, then a comma, then you start the next author's last name, and you do the same format over again. So, if I was writing an example, I think if you look at number 2A in red, it gives you an example of 2 authors. So, Groisberg, comma, B, period, comma, and sign, Connolly, comma, K, period. This is how it should appear on your reference page. Please be mindful that your sources on your reference page should be ordered in alphabetical order. So you look at the very first letter of each one of your citations and put them in alphabetical order. If you have 2 sources with the same author, you'll need to go through the letter of each citation and until you find one letter that is different from the other citation. Whichever letter is different based on that letter and its placement in the alphabet, you will need to order it based on that alphabetical order. Capitalization is the last one. You should capitalize only the first letter of books, chapters, articles, web pages, just the first letter. If for some reason within your citation you need to include a colon or something to that effect, you'll capitalize the letter of the first word after that colon, but you won't capitalize any others, despite whether or not it's capitalized in the article itself. So take a look at the 4A example with me. It should be in red. Great leaders who make the mix work. Notice that I only capitalized great, the very first word. Everything else is lowercase. In the title, it has a colon, so I put the colon in there because we can't change the title of a paper. It's not ours. So, colon. Then I capitalized 20 because it's the first word, but everything else is lowercase except for CEOs. Because it's an acronym and it was capitalized within the article itself, I went ahead and capitalized that. If you look at slide 11, it pops up this big explosion type reminder image. So I wanted to remind you guys that on your reference pages, you do not have to include quotation marks around the titles of short works or articles. Just put the title name, capitalize the first letter of the title, and then leave it alone. Now, you should still italicize the titles of longer works, and I'll show you what that looks like here in just a second. But remember, for the reference page, no quotation marks. Looking at the next slide, slide 12, which is the last slide, you'll see an image breakdown of a reference sheet. Now, I got this image from Purdue OWL, and I'll tell you a little more about that website at the very end of the presentation. But I wanted to give you guys a visual example of what a correct reference sheet should look like. You'll notice that references, which is the title of your reference page, should be centered with typed 12-point font Times New Roman. It needs to be black, and it does not need to have any special features. So don't boldface it, do not italicize it, and do not underline it. You also cannot put it in pretty colors or anything like that. It needs to be very plain. Starting with your first citation, you need to make sure that you have a hanging indent formatting, set up. So I'm going to start my citation with the author's name. If you look at the red box in the image, it'll show you how to set up those authors' names. So Cummings, comma, J period, N period. Those are first and middle initials. If you're given a middle initial, it's important that you use it. If you're not given one, you don't have to scour the internet to find it. Just omit it. When you have multiple authors in your citation, you need to separate them with a comma, as is provided in the example. After you identify the authors of the source, you need to open parentheses, put the publication date in, and close parentheses. This should be followed by a period. The next piece of information that goes into your reference sheet citation should be the title of the chapter or article from which you found your information. So this is denoted in green below. You need to capitalize the first letter of the title and then keep the rest of the words lowercase, unless it is capitalized within the title, like an acronym or something to that effect. But in most cases, you just need to capitalize the first letter. The second box in orange is highlighting the book or the longer work from which that article appears in. If you're just citing the article itself, you do not need to include the title of the book or journal. But if it does appear in a book or journal, you need to include that title, and it does need to be in italics. After you quote or after you cite the title of the book or journal, you'll need to put a period. Then you will proceed using the volume and the issue number. The volume number goes outside parentheses. The issue number goes inside of parentheses. You may only see these in works that are frequently published, so newspapers, magazines, things of that sort. The last piece of information you should include in your citations on your reference page is the page number. Well, I should say page range. Do you remember earlier when I was talking about putting page numbers in your in-text citations? The only difference between in-text citations and the citations on your reference page is that in-text citations call for the precise page from which you received your direct quotation, while citations in your reference page want the page range of the entire article. If you look at the blue box on my example, it's a turquoise box, not blue, sorry. The turquoise box on the example, it says 103 to 108. This denotes that the article entitled The Quality of Online Social Relationships can be found on pages 103 through 108 of the Communications of the ACM. Below my breakdown of the references, you'll find 2 additional examples written in correct formatting for APA-style citations. If you need additional examples, feel free to consult those. The blue box at the bottom of that image was put there by the developers of the image. I received the image from Purdue OWL, and so the box is Purdue OWL's take on reference pages. So if you need further clarification, you can read the blue box at the bottom. Now, because I was making a PowerPoint about the importance of citations, I felt like it was important that I cite the source I got my information from. So most of my information was received from Purdue OWL Online Writing Lab, the APA Styling and Formatting Guide. I received most of this information by going to their website and clicking through the style guide. They offer tutorials from actual people, but they also have tutorials on how to cite in different citation formats. So they include APA, but also Chicago, MLA, etc., etc. So if you have a professor that wants you to write in a different writing style, make sure you consult Purdue OWL. They'll tell you all of the important aspects of that citing style. If you look at the very bottom of my slide, you'll see my citation, and this will tell you how to cite a website. So just like regular sources, I'm going to put the contributors or the author's names and last names and first initials, separated by commas with an and sign before the last author contributor. Then I'll put a period after the first initial, open my parentheses, put the publication date, the date that it was copyrighted or published to the internet. Then I'll close my parentheses, put a period behind it. From there, I will put the title of the website or the area of the website I'm looking at. So Purdue OWL APA general format. I will finish that with a period. And then this is where websites differ from print sources. You need to include the URL in your citation. But before you put the URL, you must write retrieved from. So if you direct your attention to the red box, it says retrieved from, and then I have the Purdue OWL Online Writing Lab link right directly after. If you need additional help with your citation sources, feel free to copy and paste that URL into your search engine, and it should take you to the Purdue OWL Online Writing Lab. They should be able to help you if you have any additional questions. This has been K.Scott with a very quick overview of citation formatting for APA writing style. So I'll let you all go. Happy citing!